Hey everyone, good evening. Wow, it's so great to have you all here on this Thanksgiving Eve. Tonight's really special because it's all about sharing stories of gratitude, of seeing how God has been at work in our lives. Over the years, people have shared some really amazing, sometimes funny, sometimes surprising moments they're thankful for, and tonight is no different. So get comfortable, maybe grab a seat, and get ready to hear some real heartfelt stories about faith, perseverance, and answered prayers. So, let's take a step back for a moment and talk about Thanksgiving, not just the turkey and football side of it, but what it originally meant and why it has such a deep history. Most of us think of Thanksgiving as this big American holiday where we gather with family, eat way too much, maybe watch a parade or a game, and say a quick prayer of thanks, but the roots go way deeper than that. Historically, Thanksgiving has always been about giving thanks to God for His blessings, and one of the most fascinating moments in this history comes from George Washington himself, with what's known as the first Thanksgiving Proclamation, which he issued in 1789. This is actually the first presidential proclamation in the entire United States, which is kind of incredible when you think about it. Now, Washington was very intentional about why this day existed and why people should set aside time for gratitude. It wasn't about a holiday in the casual sense we think of today. It was about recognizing God's providence, acknowledging His guidance, and expressing genuine, humble gratitude for all the blessings that had allowed the young nation to survive and thrive. Washington's words are really something else, and you can almost hear the weight of them when you read the proclamation. He starts by talking about the duty of all nations to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God, to obey His will, and to be grateful for His benefits. That idea of duty is important. He wasn't just saying, "Hey, let's have a party and say thanks." No, he meant that recognizing God's hand in our lives, individually and as a nation, is actually a responsibility. And then he goes on to note that both houses of Congress requested him to recommend a day of public thanksgiving and prayer, a day devoted to acknowledging with grateful hearts the many signal favors of God. In other words, this wasn't just a suggestion for a casual thank you. It was a day meant to unite people in public recognition of God's blessings, to reflect on His mercy, and to give thanks for the peace and opportunities that had been afforded to the country. One of the things I love about this proclamation is how specific it gets about the blessings being acknowledged. Washington mentions the opportunity for the people to peacefully establish a form of government for their safety and happiness. Think about that for a second. The nation had just come out of the Revolutionary War, and here was a leader telling everyone to pause and reflect on the fact that they had survived, had a chance to build a government, and were experiencing a measure of peace and plenty. He's pointing out that these aren't small things, they're huge milestones that are worthy of gratitude. And he goes further, emphasizing that people should unite in rendering sincere and humble thanks for God's care and protection of the population. Not just now, but previously, even before the nation had been fully established. And then comes the interesting part. Washington talks about the favorable interpositions of God's providence during the course and conclusion of the war, the tranquility and union that followed, and the ability to establish constitutions for safety and happiness. He even points out the civil and religious liberties the nation enjoyed and the means to acquire and spread knowledge. Essentially, he's saying that everything from the freedoms we enjoy to the opportunities we have to learn and grow, all of it is a gift from God that deserves recognition and thanks. And when you think about it, that's really the core of Thanksgiving. It's not just about what's on the table or who's coming over. It's about pausing and acknowledging the bigger picture, the blessings that might sometimes go unnoticed, and taking a moment to reflect and say, thank you. Now, there's a fascinating little footnote in history about this proclamation that makes the story even more interesting. After Washington issued it, the original document was actually lost for about 130 years. Can you imagine that? The very first presidential proclamation, and it basically disappeared. It had been handwritten by William Jackson, who was the secretary to President Washington, and then signed by Washington himself. Somehow, it got misplaced or ended up mixed in with private papers when the U.S. Capitol moved from New York to Washington, D.C. It wasn't until 1921 that Dr. J.C. Fitzpatrick, an assistant chief of the manuscripts division at the Library of Congress, found it at an auction being held in an art gallery in New York. He purchased it for $300. $300, and that's where it resides today, safe in the Library of Congress. It's wild to think that something so historically significant was just tucked away for over a century, almost forgotten, and now we can actually see it and read it. That little piece of history reminds us that gratitude itself has a kind of timeless value. Just like the proclamation survived, the idea of giving thanks, of pausing to recognize blessings, persists across generations, even when we forget or take it for granted for a while. Reading the proclamation is almost like stepping into Washington's mindset and seeing what he wanted people to understand about Thanksgiving. He wasn't simply saying, "Be happy and enjoy yourself today." He was highlighting the responsibility of gratitude, the importance of reflection, and the central role of faith in acknowledging blessings, and that's still relevant today. When we gather with friends, family, or community, whether in a church setting or around a dinner table, it's a chance to pause, share our stories, and really reflect on what we're thankful for. The personal stories of faith, resilience, and answered prayers that get shared on occasions like this echo the very spirit of what Washington was pointing to. It's a day where gratitude becomes a communal experience, a time to recognize not only what we have personally, but also the broader providence that's been at work in our lives and the lives of others. And here's the thing, what makes Thanksgiving really powerful is that it's both personal and collective. We're thankful as individuals for specific blessings, but we're also acknowledging a shared history, shared struggles, and shared triumphs. Washington's proclamation underscores that dual aspect. He talks about the nation, the people, and the various ways God has blessed them collectively, but the message resonates on a personal level too. Everyone listening could reflect on their own life and see the hand of God guiding, protecting, and blessing them in ways they might not even realize. That's the magic of Thanksgiving. It bridges the personal and the communal, and it reminds us why gratitude isn't just a fleeting feeling, but a practice, a way of life. So, as we look around and see people preparing to share their stories of thankfulness tonight, we can't help but connect the dots back to that first proclamation. The essence is the same, taking a moment to pause, to acknowledge the good, to thank God for the opportunities, the protection, the victories, and even the trials that teach us and grow us. In many ways, every testimony, every story of answered prayer or personal breakthrough is a modern echo of that first official call to Thanksgiving. It's the same idea, recognizing that we are not alone, that there is a source of guidance, protection, and provision, and that acknowledging it brings perspective, humility, and joy. So yeah, when we talk about Thanksgiving, it's more than the turkey, pies, and family gatherings. It's about intentionally reflecting on the blessings, both big and small, seeing the ways God has been at work in our lives, and sharing those reflections with others, whether it's through stories that are funny, touching, miraculous, or simply relatable. Each one is a chance to connect, to inspire, and to remind ourselves why giving thanks is so important. And knowing the history, from the original proclamation by George Washington to the lost and found document that's preserved today, gives it an extra layer of depth. It's a tradition rooted in faith, reflection, and communal gratitude, and it's something we can continue to embrace, celebrate, and share year after year. Okay? So Matthew and Shamey's story is one of those tales that really tugs at your heart because it's full of hope, persistence, and just this sense of God's timing being perfect, even when it doesn't make sense at the moment. They actually met back in 2014, and get this, they met ballroom dancing. Yeah, it's like something out of a fairy tale, traveling around, dancing in different cities, living this picture-perfect romance. And eventually, they got married in 2017. Both of them were doing really well in their careers, living in Milan, and honestly, children weren't really on their radar at first. But over time, God started shifting their hearts and changing their desires. They wanted to teach kids to dance, to travel with them, to show them classic shows from their own childhoods, and to raise them with values they cared deeply about. It's like this seed was planted in their hearts that children were going to be a big part of their lives, even if the path there wasn't straightforward. So, they tried for a couple of years to conceive naturally, but nothing was happening. They went through all the usual emotional ups and downs, and eventually they sought professional medical help. And that's when they got hit with the harsh news. The chances of conceiving naturally were extremely low. Imagine the frustration and sadness, right? So then they started talking about adoption, but even that seemed kind of impossible at first because of the high costs. And then, of course, 2020 hit, and the world went into lockdown, which threw a wrench into a lot of plans for everyone. But here's the incredible thing, God used that time to lead them to a new church, Cornerstone Chapel. That church community ended up being instrumental in their journey toward fostering and adoption. A few months after getting involved, they started a small group at church, which really helped them feel connected. But then, God began nudging them toward fostering. They were inspired by someone in their church who had adopted through the foster program, and honestly, they hadn't even known that was a viable option before. So they felt God calling them to step into that path, even though it was going to be long and challenging. Their house in West Virginia, which was surrounded by mountains, horses, and a big backyard, felt like the perfect place for kids to grow up. It was really ideal in every way, almost like God was painting a picture for what was to come. Now, the foster program itself wasn't a simple thing. There were inspections, background checks, training, and a whole lot of paperwork. But Matthew and Shammy were determined. They rushed to get the bedrooms ready, built bunk beds, decorated everything, and just waited. And this is where patience really comes into play. They waited for months, wondering if there were even kids out there who needed a home. They started to question if maybe this wasn't the path God intended. Life went on. They kept themselves busy with gardening, cooking, and enjoying the harvest, but those empty bedrooms were a constant, bittersweet reminder of their hope and longing. Finally, after 2 long years, the call came. There were 3 siblings in need of a home. By this time, they had tempered their expectations, not letting themselves get too excited because previous opportunities had fallen through at the last minute. But somehow, this time felt different. They went through meetings and preparations with a sense of peace, trusting that if God wanted these kids with them, He would make it happen. And then, on December 28th, the moment came. The doorbell rang, and standing there were 3 little kids, a 10-year-old boy, a 10-year-old girl, and a 5-year-old little brother. The youngest looked up and asked, "Are you our new parents?" And just like that, everything changed. From that moment on, their lives became a whirlwind of activity, learning, and love. Initially, they had made peace with the idea that older children might not immediately call them mom and dad. But within just a week, the kids were doing exactly that. The adjustment period, getting to know each other, and slowly beginning to trust one another was filled with all the little firsts that make life so rich. Their first Easter egg hunt, their first time homeschooling, their first homemade Mother's Day gifts, and even the first father-daughter dance at church. And it wasn't just the little events. Matthew and Shammy were present for all of the big milestones too. Museum trips, visiting battlefields and monuments, attending workshops at Home Depot, going on roller coasters, listening to live music, roasting s'mores over an open fire, riding horses, planting seeds, and harvesting crops. These experiences weren't just fun, they were formative moments that knit the family together and created memories that would last a lifetime. 6 months into fostering, something incredible happened. The 2 oldest children responded to an altar call and gave their lives to Christ. For Matthew and Shammy, that moment wasn't just spiritually significant, it was deeply personal, marking a new chapter for the family. Despite the joy, there was still the uncertainty of whether the children would officially be theirs forever. But eventually, the opportunity to adopt them came, and of course, they said yes without hesitation. On September 27th, 2024, the adoption was finalized, and they officially became a family. The K group from church, which had supported them through this entire journey, celebrated as though they were adopting the kids themselves. Their home, which had already been full of laughter and dancing, now overflowed with the joyous chaos of 5 beautiful children. Every morning, sunrises over the mountains, horses grazing nearby, and the sounds of children laughing made the long wait worth every single moment. Throughout this journey, there were moments of doubt, moments of longing, and moments of frustration. Waiting 2 years for placement, seeing empty bedrooms every day, and wondering if God's plan would ever come to fruition could have been crushing. But Matthew and Shammy held on to their faith, trusting in God's timing. And their story really shows that faith isn't about avoiding difficulties. It's about trusting God through them. They learned patience, resilience, and the profound joy that comes from following God's guidance, even when the path seems unclear or the timing seems delayed. And what makes their story so compelling isn't just the end result of adoption, it's all the moments leading up to it. The preparation, the waiting, the small acts of love, and the patience to let the process unfold naturally. All of that sets the stage for the kind of family they have now. Each child's arrival, each small victory, and every first experience together adds layers to the narrative of hope, trust, and divine timing. The story isn't polished or perfect. There are bumps, detours, and emotional highs and lows, but that's what makes it so human and relatable. Matthew and Shamie's journey captures the essence of what it means to live faithfully, embrace God's plan, and celebrate the moments when patience and persistence intersect with divine timing. By the time the adoption was finalized, the Eubanks family had already experienced months of living as a unit. They had navigated everyday routines, school schedules, chores, and shared meals. They had also faced the emotional complexity of building trust and love with children who had experienced loss and uncertainty. And yet, all of those challenges brought them closer together. They celebrated each milestone, big and small, recognizing that each was a tangible reminder of God's faithfulness and goodness, from the first shy smiles to the confident declarations of love and family. Every moment reinforced the idea that the long wait and all the preparation were entirely worth it. In a way, Matthew and Shamie's story is a microcosm of faith in action. It's about recognizing God's calling, responding with courage, enduring the waiting period with patience, and embracing the joy that comes when His plan unfolds. It shows that blessings often come in ways we don't anticipate, and that the journey itself, the ups and downs, the uncertainties, and the emotional investment is as valuable as the destination. The Eubanks family story isn't just about adoption, it's about love, resilience, and the extraordinary ways that God works in the lives of those who trust Him. It's a story of hope realized, a dream fulfilled, and a family bound not just by legal papers, but by shared experiences, faith, and love. So when you think about Matthew and Shamie, I think about the years of waiting, the nights of uncertainty, the hours of preparation, and the moments of doubt. Think about the doorbell ringing on that December day and 3 children stepping into a home that had been waiting for them all along. Think about the small everyday moments, the laughter, the first dance, the field trips, the homeschooling, the first s'mores, the roller coasters, and all the other firsts that became milestones in their shared life. And finally, think about the joy and fulfillment that comes from living in alignment with God's plan, even when the path is long and winding. Their story is a testament to patience, faith, and the undeniable truth that sometimes the waiting and preparation are all part of the blessing itself. Alright, so Michael Cravens' story is really one that hits close to home for a lot of people because it's so human and relatable. He grew up in the Catholic faith, but honestly, he admits he was following God in name more than in practice. He prayed sometimes, but if things worked out, he just chalked it up to coincidence. God was there, but Michael hadn't really recognized or trusted Him fully. It's kind of the story of a lot of us, right? You know God's there, but life and our doubts make it easy to take Him for granted. So, about a year ago, Michael decided he wanted to recommit himself to God and truly follow Jesus. But, and here's the thing, it didn't exactly start smoothly. Around the same time, he became unemployed. 6 months into being out of work, things were pretty bleak, and it's one thing to decide you want to grow in faith, but another when life throws that kind of uncertainty at you. He kept praying, but it was hard. There were days he felt anxious and worried, wondering if God was even listening. It's that tension between wanting to believe and struggling with doubt. Michael knew he needed support and structure, so he signed up for Christianity 101 and 102 classes at his church, along with an orientation. It was there he met Pastor Mike, who had this real heartfelt faith, even sharing stories about ministering to the sick and the power of prayer he'd seen firsthand. Listening to Pastor Mike, Michael felt this gentle nudge on his heart, like God was saying, "I'm here, I've got this." He realized he needed to approach prayer differently, with more sincerity, really trusting God instead of just going through the motions. So, that night at orientation, he asked Pastor Mike to pray for him, specifically about getting a job. Michael left with this sense of peace, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not because his situation had changed instantly, but because he finally felt like he was placing it in God's hands, truly surrendering it. For weeks after, nothing seemed to happen. It's one thing to pray and have faith, and another to endure the waiting. But Michael kept at it. He continued to pray, trusting that God was working behind the scenes, even when he couldn't see it. And here's where the story gets really powerful. Michael was also looking forward to his baptism, which had been delayed due to weather. He kept thinking to himself, wouldn't it be incredible if God answered this prayer on the day he gets baptized? It was kind of a quiet hope he held on to, a little spark of faith amidst the waiting. And then, the morning of his baptism, he gets a phone call, a job offer. Not just any job, but the one he had been hoping for, the one that fit perfectly with his skills and needs. It's hard to even describe that moment, the disbelief, the overwhelming joy, the relief, and the understanding that God had indeed been listening all along. It was this tangible, real-life answer to prayer that Michael had been nurturing for months. What's incredible about Michael's story isn't just that he got a job, though that's huge. It's the way he grew through the process. He learned about patience, persistence, and trust in God. He realized that prayers don't always get answered instantly, but that doesn't mean they aren't being heard. And he learned that surrendering our worries doesn't remove challenges, but it does shift our perspective. Michael went from doubt to trust, from anxiety to peace, and from uncertainty to a newfound confidence in God's timing and plan. This experience had a ripple effect on how he approached faith in other areas of his life too. He began to pray more intentionally, not just for himself, but for others around him, seeing the power of interceding with real heartfelt hope. And each answered prayer, big or small, reinforced his trust in God's love and providence. Michael's journey became a testament to the fact that God doesn't just hear prayers in theory, he acts even in ways that align perfectly with our needs and his timing. Another remarkable part of his story is how grounded it was in community. Meeting Pastor Mike, being part of the orientation, and connecting with others in his church provided both guidance and support. Sometimes, the struggle with faith or the feeling of being unheard in prayer can be isolating. But for Michael, having a community to walk with, to pray with, and to celebrate answered prayers with made all the difference. It highlighted how faith isn't just a personal journey, it's something nurtured in connection with others. And Michael didn't stop there. After that first answered prayer, he kept going. Each morning, he continued to pray and noticed more ways God was working in his life. Some prayers were big, like getting the job he desperately needed. Others were quieter, subtle shifts that strengthened his relationships, gave him insight, or opened doors he hadn't even considered. It became clear that this was a life transformed, not through magic, not through luck, but through consistent faith, surrender, and recognition of God's presence in every detail. What's beautiful is how relatable his experience is. It's not a perfect, seamless narrative. There were struggles, doubts, moments of despair, and waiting that tested him. That's the human part of it. Life doesn't always line up neatly, and faith isn't about pretending it does. Michael's story captures the messy, sometimes uncomfortable, but ultimately rewarding journey of putting trust in God, even when the outcome isn't immediately visible. By the time he walked into the church for his baptism, Michael was already changed. He had learned about persistence, the value of community, the power of prayer, and the importance of surrender. And when God answered his prayer for employment on that very morning, it wasn't just about the job. It was a tangible affirmation of the faith he had been building, of the trust he had been cultivating, and of the lessons he had been learning about God's timing and care. Reflecting on his journey, Michael understands now that those months of uncertainty and waiting weren't wasted. They were formative. They taught him resilience, deepened his faith, and allowed him to experience firsthand the joy and peace that comes from aligning one's life with God's will. His story isn't just about the moment his prayer was answered. It's about the process, the personal growth, and the unwavering truth that God listens and responds in his perfect timing. And it's this combination, the struggle, the commitment, the waiting, and the eventual answer, that makes Michael's testimony so powerful and human. It's not polished or unrealistically fast. It's authentic. It resonates because it mirrors the real-life experiences of many people who are trying to grow in faith while facing challenges, doubt, and uncertainty. His journey demonstrates that faith isn't about immediate gratification. It's about trust, persistence, and the incredible impact of answered prayers when we least expect them but most need them. So, when we think about Michael Cravens, we see more than a man who got a job. We see someone who learned to rely on God in the middle of struggle, who found peace in surrender, who experienced the support of a community, and who witnessed firsthand the tangible results of persistent, faithful prayer. His story serves as a reminder that even when life feels uncertain, God is present, listening, and working in ways we may not immediately understand. And when those answers do come, they carry not just practical change, but profound emotional and spiritual impact, reinforcing the depth and faithfulness of God's love. Priscilla B.M.'s story is one of those journeys that feels really raw and relatable because it starts in a place many of us have been, feeling lost, unworthy, and trying to do life on our own terms. At the beginning of 2023, she found herself in a relationship with someone who didn't share her faith. She was trying to fix things, trying to save this person, but she was doing it with her own strength. And honestly, she wasn't really in a good place with God at the time. She felt unworthy, unlovable, and just kind of stuck in a cycle of relying on the wrong source for comfort and guidance. Then, one day, she went to the movies and saw Jesus Revolution. And wow, that moment changed everything for her. Seeing the story of Greg Laurie and his wife and how they were living out their faith hit her right in the heart. She suddenly felt this undeniable pull, like God was saying, "Priscilla, this is what I have for you. I've got something better, something real." It was the wake-up call she didn't even know she needed. That movie became a turning point, a moment where she started to realize that her first love, her true love, had always been God, and it was time to return to Him. A few days later, Priscilla ended the relationship with the non-believer. That was a bold but necessary step for her. It wasn't just about ending something that wasn't working. It was about making space in her heart to let God back in, to refocus her life and priorities. It wasn't easy. There was pain and uncertainty, but there was also this budding sense of freedom, the kind that comes when you finally choose the right path, even if it feels scary. As the year went on, Priscilla's relationship with God started to grow in ways she hadn't experienced before. She enrolled in the Cornerstone Chapel Bible Institute, realizing that her foundation of faith wasn't as solid as she had thought. She had questions, lots of them, but instead of being discouraged, she found answers, and more importantly, she found understanding. These classes weren't just academic, they were practical, life-shaping, and they gave her the tools to reconnect with God in a way that was authentic and personal. Alongside her studies, she embraced a focus on surrendering to God. Priscilla started to let go of the need to control every situation in her life, to try to fix things with her own strength, and instead allowed God to lead. That surrender didn't happen overnight, it's never that simple, but over time, she began to experience a sense of freedom that she hadn't felt before. The anxiety, the fear, the constant trying to do it all herself slowly started to lift. She realized that letting go and trusting God didn't make her weak. It made her stronger, more resilient, and more connected to her true purpose. Through surrender and focus, Priscilla rediscovered her first love, the Lord. This wasn't just a vague, abstract feeling. It was tangible. She felt His presence, His guidance, and His love in a very real way. It changed how she approached every part of her life. Decisions became clearer, her outlook shifted, and she began to experience the kind of peace that comes from walking closely with God. She also realized that her worth wasn't based on anyone else's opinion or her own achievements. It was rooted in God's love for her, and that revelation transformed the way she saw herself and her purpose. Priscilla's story is inspiring because it's so relatable. It shows the power of returning to God, of trusting Him, and of letting go of control. It's about recognizing that sometimes the path we think we're on isn't the right one, and that God's plan is always better, even if it requires difficult choices and personal growth. Her journey demonstrates that coming back to your faith can be a process, full of small, incremental steps, but every step is significant. It's the little moments of decision, the quiet prayers, and the choices to let God in that add up to real, lasting transformation. By the end of the year, Priscilla wasn't just back in a relationship with God, she had a renewed sense of purpose and identity. She wasn't just surviving or getting by, she was thriving, growing in faith, and embracing the freedom that comes from letting God lead. She had experienced firsthand that surrender isn't about giving up, it's about gaining a deeper, more authentic connection with the one who loves us most. Her story is a beautiful reminder that no matter how far we feel we've strayed, it's never too late to return to God. That first love, that constant, unwavering presence is always waiting for us. And when we take the step to refocus, to surrender, and to trust, incredible transformation can happen. Not because we're perfect, not because we've figured it all out, but because God's love is powerful enough to meet us right where we are and lead us to where we're meant to be. Priscilla's journey is a testament to that love, to the freedom and strength found in surrender, and to the life-changing impact of truly reconnecting with God. Amy and Jay Rear's story is one of those journeys that really shows you how faith, community, and perseverance can carry you through some of life's toughest moments. It all started in September 2021 when Amy felt this quiet nudge to get a mammogram. Now, she had no family history of breast cancer, and it had only been about 14 months since her last checkup. So it wasn't something she expected to act on immediately, but she listened to that little inner prompting, that quiet whisper, and she went through with it. And looking back, she knew that small decision was the first step in a series of events that would forever change her and Jay's lives. The mammogram led to additional imaging and eventually biopsies. Amy remembers standing at the doorway of the procedure room, feeling a mixture of fear, uncertainty, and anticipation. The woman guiding her was wearing a cross necklace, and for some reason, that small detail struck her deeply. It was like a quiet reminder that even in moments of fear and pain, there is a presence and a power greater than ourselves. Amy recalls thinking that if Christ could endure immense suffering, then maybe, just maybe, she could endure this too. Then came the diagnosis: breast cancer. The words hit like a tidal wave. In that moment, everything shifted. It wasn't just a medical condition, it immediately became a family crisis. Jay, their daughters, and Amy herself were all swept into a storm of fear, confusion, and uncertainty. But even in that darkness, they leaned into prayer, faith, and their belief in God's provision. Pastor Emerson anointed Amy with oil, and their K group, even though it had been inactive for a while, rallied around them in prayer. The outpouring of love didn't stop there. Amy's mom contacted over 50 churches across the country, asking for their prayers and support. Just imagining that, you realize how incredible it is to feel so many people united in hope and faith for your well-being. As the treatment process began, Amy and Jay had to navigate not only medical complexities, but also emotional and financial challenges. There were moments of sheer anxiety, nights filled with sleepless worry, and days when it felt like the weight of the world was on their shoulders. And yet, through every step, they clung to their faith. Every prayer, every word of encouragement from friends, family, and even strangers became a lifeline. They began to see that the power of community and prayer is not just a metaphor, it's tangible, it's real, and it can sustain you through trials that seem impossible. Financial pressures surfaced too. One particular bill from the start of Amy's journey was $1,100, a number that felt almost impossible to manage on top of everything else. But God provided in a way that was almost poetic. A friend started a GoFundMe, and the first 2 donations happened to total exactly $1,100. Small coincidences like that, though you realize it's not coincidence, reinforce their trust in God's timing and care. On top of that, Jay's employer confirmed that they could adjust his part-time status to full-time and reinstate his health insurance, which was a massive relief. In moments like these, you see the direct intersection of faith, prayer, and real-life provision, and it's almost impossible not to feel gratitude for every tiny detail. Amy's treatment was challenging, but went remarkably well. Chemotherapy and radiation weren't part of the plan, but the potential side effects were still daunting. She faced each treatment with courage and faith, experiencing minimal side effects and a positive response. And while she navigated her own treatment, Jay was also dealing with uncertainty. His job situation was precarious, and there were days when it seemed like doors were closing everywhere. 15 months into this journey, Jay learned his position was no longer needed, which could have been devastating. But even amidst these storms, they kept praying and trusting God's plan. The Rears' prayers extended beyond immediate health and financial needs. They prayed for emotional resilience, for clarity in decision-making, for peace amidst uncertainty, and for strength to navigate all aspects of this journey together as a family. And slowly, in small, almost imperceptible ways, God began answering those prayers. The right doors began to open at just the right moments, reaffirming their belief that even when we can't see the full picture, God's timing is perfect. One of the most profound answers to prayer came when Jay finally landed a job that was the best possible fit for their family. At the same time, Amy received news that her treatment was so effective that the tumors originally present were no longer detectable. These moments weren't just milestones, they were affirmations of faith, of the power of persistent prayer, and of God's providence. They saw firsthand that prayer, patience, and faith could bring about real, life-changing results, even when the journey had been long and exhausting. Through all of this, the emotional impact was profound. There were moments of fear, of questioning, and of sheer exhaustion, but there were also moments of pure joy and awe, like when they realized God had provided in exact perfect ways, sometimes in ways that felt almost miraculous. The Rears learned that faith doesn't remove challenges, it strengthens you to face them. Prayer doesn't always bring instant answers. Sometimes it's about cultivating trust, patience, and hope. And community support isn't just helpful, it's essential. The love, prayers, and encouragement from their church, friends, and family were a tangible reminder that God often works through people to provide, guide, and sustain us. Amy and Jay also learned lessons about perspective. They realized that even in the midst of fear and uncertainty, there are blessings to be acknowledged and moments of grace that can be celebrated. Every small victory, every sign of provision, every answered prayer became a source of encouragement and strengthened their trust in God's plan. They discovered that perseverance isn't just enduring difficulty, it's actively relying on faith, community, and God's guidance to navigate it. The process itself, navigating medical appointments, treatment, finances, emotional ups and downs, was part of the journey, shaping their faith and resilience in ways that the outcomes alone could never convey. By the time Amy's treatment ended and Jay's new job was secured, the Rears had not only overcome immediate challenges, but had grown spiritually, emotionally, and relationally. Their journey demonstrated that God's care is both immediate and continuous, manifesting in the tangible details of everyday life. Their story shows how faith, prayer, and community can intersect to create profound transformation, offering hope and inspiration to anyone facing trials of their own. Ultimately, the Rears experience is about more than just surviving cancer or navigating financial and job-related stress. It's about seeing God's hand at work in every moment, recognizing the power of prayer, and embracing the support of a loving community. It's about facing challenges with faith, perseverance, and trust, and witnessing firsthand the ways in which God provides for those who seek Him. From the moment Amy felt that nudge to get a mammogram to the news of her full recovery and Jay's perfect job placement, every step of the journey was a testament to the faithfulness of God. Their story resonates because it's human and real. There are no shortcuts, no easy fixes, just the continuous interplay of faith, action, prayer, and trust. It reminds us that even in the darkest moments, when uncertainty seems overwhelming, God's provision is present. Amy and Jay Rears' journey is a powerful example of how perseverance, community support, and unwavering faith can lead to transformative outcomes. It's a story of hope realized, prayers answered, and the enduring power of God's presence in our lives. Their experience shows us that even in the face of daunting challenges, faith, trust, and prayer can guide us to peace, restoration, and joy. Alex and Kelly Coley's story is one that really hits hard because it's messy, raw, and so human, Like many couples, the pandemic threw them into a whirlwind of challenges. 4 years ago, during that time, Alex was dealing with lingering health issues that were already weighing on him, and then the broader stress of the world seemed to pile on top. Watching family relationships strain and fragment under the pressures of the pandemic was incredibly painful, and Alex felt like he was losing the one stable thing in his life. It was overwhelming, and that kind of stress can make you do things you never thought you'd do. He started blaming God, which is honestly something a lot of us can relate to. He wondered why all of this was happening and why the stability he had relied on seemed to crumble. Instead of turning to God for help, Alex sought out worldly solutions, falling back into old habits and distractions he had known before being saved. He started smoking again, consuming pornography, numbing himself with movies, TV, and other forms of escapism. Anything to avoid facing the pain and the brokenness in his marriage and in himself. And the internet, of course, became a place to find affirmation for choices he knew deep down weren't healthy. But as the Bible says, validating sin only leads to death. And that's exactly what Alex found. It was a cycle of distraction and damage. The tension in their marriage escalated, and Alex found himself seeking separation from Kelly, the woman he loved deeply but felt was part of a situation he couldn't fix. They were on the brink of divorce, trying to sell their house, and the whole process felt like the final step off a cliff. Alex now realizes that a prodigal isn't really a prodigal until they step completely away from what's safe, familiar, and good. That step of leaving, painful as it was, set the stage for something miraculous to happen, even if at the time it felt like an ending. Even in the midst of this chaos, God was quietly working. Alex began to notice nudges, subtle moments where God was speaking to him through his word. Isaiah's promise not to fear, to be strengthened and upheld, kept showing up at the right moments. It was like God was saying, I'm still here, even if you don't see it yet. Alex started to realize that his efforts to fix everything on his own were failing, and that true change could only come through surrender and obedience to God. The separation, as devastating as it was, became a turning point. Kelly moved out, and Alex felt the sharp pain of loss, but that space allowed him to reflect, to confront his mistakes, and to start listening to God's call. One Sunday morning, after Kelly had moved out, Alex attended a sermon he wasn't thrilled about. He really didn't want to hear from the pastor that day. But as he listened to the story of Jesus weeping over Jerusalem, Alex felt the Holy Spirit reach deep into his heart. It was as if the message was written just for him, showing the consequences of rejecting God's guidance and the ripple effects it could have for generations. He felt personally confronted, and in that moment, something clicked. He saw Jesus' outstretched hand, the same invitation he had known from his first salvation experience, and he realized that he could still return. He could be forgiven and restored. Running to God, Alex asked for forgiveness and a change of heart. And right then, something shifted inside him. He began to see his marriage, his wife, and his own actions in a new light. This was the start of the reconciliation process. And while it wasn't instant, it was transformative. They started dating again, but this time with intentionality, prayer, and counseling guiding every step. God's role was front and center. They realized they couldn't rebuild their marriage on their own, and they needed Him to lead every decision, every conversation, and every act of forgiveness. Marriage 2.0, as they call it now, isn't perfect, but it's deeper and richer than it ever was before. Through counseling and prayer, Alex and Kelly learned how to communicate better, how to forgive sincerely, and how to love in ways that reflect Christ's love. They discovered that true love isn't about self-fulfillment or avoiding conflict. It's about sacrifice, patience, and walking through challenges together with God as the foundation. They learned that marriage isn't just about being happy, it's about being holy together, growing spiritually, and supporting each other through the hardest seasons. One of the most powerful parts of their journey was seeing the transformation in themselves as individuals. Alex, who had fallen back into old habits, learned accountability, repentance, and the importance of obedience to God. Kelly, too, experienced growth. Her patience, forgiveness, and steadfast faith helped anchor the relationship. Together, they discovered a resilience and a depth of love that only comes from walking through trials and emerging with God at the center. Their raw emotions, the frustration, the anger, the sadness, and the hope, all of it was real and necessary for the growth they experienced. Prayer played a huge role in every step. They didn't just pray casually, they prayed with intention, asking God to intervene, guide, and heal. Counseling complemented this, providing practical tools for conflict resolution, communication, and forgiveness. And slowly, the marriage transformed. What once seemed like a doomed relationship became a place of restoration, intimacy, and renewed purpose. They were able to rebuild trust and create a foundation that was stronger than it had ever been before. It wasn't easy, and there were days that tested them, but the commitment to faith and to each other made all the difference. Marriage 2.0 is more than just a catchy phrase. It represents a rebirth, a chance to live in the fullness of God's plan for their relationship. They didn't just repair what was broken, they built something new, something vibrant, grounded in love, faith, and a shared commitment to God's guidance. Their journey is a testament to the fact that no matter how far a relationship has strayed, God's power to restore, redeem, and renew is greater than any mistake or struggle. Throughout the process, Alex and Kelly experienced moments that were both heart-wrenching and joyous. The separation was painful, the realization of their own shortcomings was humbling, and the work of rebuilding trust was painstaking. Yet, these challenges became opportunities for growth, reflection, and deeper intimacy. Every prayer answered, every moment of patience exercised, and every act of forgiveness contributed to a marriage that is now stronger, more loving, and more resilient than ever before. Their story is full of hope for anyone struggling in their marriage. It's a reminder that God can take even the most broken situations and bring restoration. That reconciliation is possible, that love can be renewed, and that faith is not just a concept but a lived experience that can guide, heal, and transform relationships. The Coley's journey shows that when God is invited into the mess, the raw emotions, the mistakes, and the pain, he can create something beautiful, something enduring, and something real. Alex and Kelly's experience also emphasizes the importance of surrender. They had to let go of pride, ego, and the desire to control the outcome. They had to acknowledge that true change, true healing, and true restoration could only come through God's intervention. This surrender wasn't passive, it was active, requiring trust, patience, prayer, and consistent effort, and the results speak for themselves. Marriage 2.0 is a marriage transformed. A marriage with God at its center. A marriage that now offers hope and encouragement to others facing similar struggles. Ultimately, their story is a testament to the power of faith, prayer, and God's unwavering presence in the hardest seasons of life. It's about how even when a marriage is on the brink, when life feels unmanageable, and when human efforts fail, God can step in and restore, renew, and transform. Alex and Kelly Coley's journey is messy, human, and imperfect, but that's exactly what makes it powerful. It's real, it's relatable, and it's full of hope. They emerge not just as a surviving couple, but as a thriving example of God's love, guidance, and power to heal and restore. Their story reminds us that even in the darkest seasons, restoration is possible, and God's plan for love and unity can triumph over struggle, doubt, and brokenness. Jake Donheimer's story is one that feels really relatable because it's messy, honest, and shows how God can work in the midst of real-life struggles. He didn't grow up in a deeply Christian household. His upbringing was Christian in name, sure, but church wasn't a regular part of his life. And the Bible, if it was in the house, was more of a decoration than a guide. He didn't know the books of the Bible, didn't have a strong foundation in faith, and like a lot of kids in that situation, he was shaped more by the culture around him and his friends than by spiritual teaching. As he grew up, Jake started falling into some unhealthy patterns. He struggled with addictions, including pornography, cursing, drinking, and even experimenting with drugs. He saw firsthand where a life without God could lead, and it wasn't pretty. Then came college, which brought more challenges and more exposure to the world, including his parents' separation. Jake had always dreamed of being a family man, a devoted father and husband, and watching his own family fragment was deeply impactful. It added pressure, anxiety, and uncertainty about how he would ever achieve the stable family life he longed for. After college, he started working at a gym as a personal trainer, and that's where Alicia came into the picture. She was different, and Jake noticed it immediately, though he couldn't exactly put his finger on why. She had gotten saved 6 months earlier, and there was just something about her, an aura, a presence that felt grounded, centered, and alive in a way that Jake had never seen. She invited him to church, and though he initially hesitated because of work schedules and doubts, God began moving behind the scenes in ways Jake didn't even realize. Alicia had set up a prayer circle for him before a young adults worship night, even before he knew he would attend. By the time he walked in, everything had fallen perfectly into place. She took him by the hand and led him to the front of the worship night, right in the middle. Jake had never been to church like that, didn't even know the songs, the lyrics, or the theology, but something about the worship and the message struck him deeply. Pastor Austin gave a gospel presentation that was simple and clear, explaining that we're all sheep in need of a shepherd. It was the kind of message that could have been lost in the crowd. But somehow, Jake heard it as if God were speaking directly to him. That night, Jake made the decision to give his life to God. Immediately, he experienced this overwhelming sense of peace and joy that he couldn't explain. The urges that had controlled him, pornography, drinking, cursing, even drugs, suddenly lost their grip. It wasn't magic, and it wasn't instant perfection, but it was a radical shift in his heart and mind. For the first time, he felt truly free, like a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying had been lifted. After that night, he was determined to continue growing in faith. Alicia gave him a Bible, and he dove into reading it. He started with the Gospel of John, learning about Jesus and what his life and sacrifice meant. Then he moved to Ephesians, discovering guidance on how a husband should love his wife and how a wife should respect her husband. It wasn't just theoretical, these lessons were immediately practical. When he came across references to 1 Corinthians 13, he read about patience, kindness, humility, and other principles of love. It was humbling. Jake realized he had a lot of personal growth to do, but he was committed to it. Every day became a step toward sanctification, toward becoming the kind of man and husband he had always dreamed of being. The next phase of Jake's journey involved dating Alicia in a new way, with intentionality and faith at the center. Their relationship grew deeper as they learned to pray together, study the Bible together, and support each other in their spiritual growth. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of struggle, moments where old habits threatened to creep back in, but each challenge became an opportunity to rely on God and strengthen their bond. They weren't just building a relationship, they were building a foundation rooted in faith, trust, and shared values. Eventually, Jake and Alicia got married, and that marked another major milestone in his transformation. Marriage became a laboratory for faith, a place to practice patience, communication, and Christ-centered love. Every day offered lessons in humility, grace, and service, and Jake embraced each one. He realized that the skills he had been learning in his personal transformation, self-control, faith, reliance on God, were essential for sustaining a healthy, loving marriage. Alicia's early influence, her faith, and her consistent encouragement had been instrumental in guiding him to this point. And just when their lives seemed full, they received another incredible blessing. Jake and Alicia are expecting a baby boy, due literally on Christmas. The timing is almost poetic, a symbol of new life, joy, and God's perfect timing. The anticipation of fatherhood adds another layer to Jake's journey. He reflects on how far he's come, from a young man struggling with addiction and confusion about life and faith, to someone embracing marriage, parenthood, and a life led by God. Every decision, every prayer, every lesson learned along the way feels magnified now as he looks toward raising his own child with faith, values, and love. Jake's story is engaging and human because it isn't about instant perfection or a life without struggles. It's about transformation, yes, but transformation through God's guidance, community support, intentional action, and a willingness to change. It shows how even someone who feels lost, overwhelmed, or far from God can experience profound change. His journey highlights the importance of mentorship in the form of Alicia's influence and community in the form of the church, as well as the role of personal choice in responding to God's call. What makes his story especially relatable is the honesty about the process, the doubts, the initial reluctance, the temptations, and the mistakes. Jake doesn't present a polished, perfect version of himself. He shares the struggles that make the eventual transformation so meaningful. The narrative is filled with tangible moments, walking into the worship night, hearing the gospel for the first time, reading the Bible, and realizing the depth of what it was teaching him, and the first moments of real freedom from old habits. These are the small, intimate details that make his experience feel real, approachable, and inspiring. Through it all, the role of God in Jake's life is central. His story isn't just about personal growth, it's about the transformative power of God's presence when you're willing to listen and follow. The peace and freedom Jake experienced after accepting Christ weren't just internal changes, they were visible, concrete shifts in his behavior, his priorities, and his relationships. His journey demonstrates that faith is lived out in everyday actions, in choices, in moments of obedience, and in the courage to step away from the past and toward God. Looking back, Jake can see a clear trajectory of transformation, from a life shaped by external influences and poor coping mechanisms to one guided by faith and purpose. His story illustrates the profound impact of God's work in a person's life. The narrative arc, from addiction and confusion through salvation and spiritual awakening to marriage, personal growth, and the anticipation of fatherhood, is not just inspiring, it's a roadmap for anyone seeking meaningful change. It's proof that life doesn't have to remain defined by past mistakes, struggles, or absence of faith. God's influence, combined with intentional choices and supportive relationships, can redirect an entire life. In essence, Jake Donheimer's story is one of redemption and hope. It's about stumbling, learning, trusting, and ultimately thriving. It's about how one pivotal night, one act of prayer, one relationship with faith can redirect a trajectory from self-destruction to a purposeful, fulfilling life. His journey from a young adult without strong faith to a husband, soon-to-be father, and a committed follower of God demonstrates the depth of transformation that's possible. It shows that God's hand can be seen in both the dramatic turning points and the everyday decisions that build a life of faith. Jake's story is human, imperfect, and completely relatable. But above all, it's a testament to the power of God to redeem, restore, and guide anyone who is willing to trust Him. The online community had so many incredible messages of gratitude. It really paints a picture of how far-reaching faith and connection can be. People from all over the country, Las Vegas, Charlotte, Florida, Massachusetts, and beyond, were sharing what they're thankful for. Some were simple but profound: gratitude for health, for children, for being able to live in a free country. Others were more personal, like someone celebrating nearly 5 years of sobriety and restored relationships, a huge milestone that comes from consistent faith and perseverance. Many viewers expressed thanks for their families, jobs, and the ability to meet everyday needs. But woven through all these messages was a deeper acknowledgement of God's hand in their lives. People spoke of answered prayers, sometimes in ways that were small and subtle, other times in life-changing, miraculous ways. One person mentioned being grateful for a true relationship with Jesus, for the salvation and guidance He provides. Another highlighted the Cornerstone Chapel community, sharing how the weekly teachings and online engagement led them and their spouse to accept Jesus, feeling connected and supported even from a distance. There were stories of challenges and triumphs too. One viewer had lost a loved one but found comfort in Christian friends who rallied around them during a difficult Thanksgiving. Another celebrated a family member being cancer-free, expressing deep gratitude for health and answered prayers. Others mentioned milestones like knee surgeries, restored family relationships, and the opportunity to grow spiritually through Bible study and prayer circles. Some shared how their children were becoming more engaged with the Word, hungry to learn, and how that brought them hope and encouragement. It was clear that these messages weren't just casual notes. They were heartfelt reflections on life, faith, and community. people recognized that the support they received from Cornerstone Chapel, both online and in person, played a tangible role in their lives. From spiritual encouragement to practical guidance, the connection strengthened their faith and gave them hope. Across states and time zones, viewers felt like part of a larger family, sharing joys, struggles, and gratitude for God's faithfulness. Reading through these messages, you can't help but feel inspired by the sheer range of experiences and the depth of thankfulness. It's a reminder that no matter where you are or what you're going through, faith and community have the power to uplift, encourage, and transform. Each story, each note of gratitude speaks to the everyday ways God is present through health, provision, answered prayers, and the support of people who care. Collectively, they show the nationwide impact of God's work in the lives of believers and the meaningful role that Cornerstone Chapel plays in connecting, guiding, and inspiring its members. Alright, as we wrap up tonight, let's just take a moment to reflect on all the incredible stories we've heard, from answered prayers to the ways God has been faithful in each life. It's clear there's so much to be thankful for. Take that gratitude into your own day, share it with others, and remember to appreciate the blessings, big and small. Keep connecting with your community, lean into faith, and let these stories inspire you to notice the goodness around you. God is faithful, and His blessings are all around.